Good evening. Tonight we drift back in time, far beyond kings and kingdoms, before the first stories were ever written. We return to the very beginning, when there was nothing at all, no earth, no sky, no sea, not even light or shadow. Just silence and the endless void. From that nothingness, the first presences would stir, and slowly the universe would begin to take shape. Gods would rise, empires of heaven would fall, and mortals would struggle in a world shaped by divine quarrels and impossible fates. This is not a tale told with thunder or fire. It is not the roaring epic sung by warriors in their halls. Instead, it is a quiet history, a soft, steady unfolding of myths so old they feel like dreams. A history told not to excite, but to ease. So settle in, let your mind grow heavy, and allow the stories of gods, monsters, and heroes to wash over you like waves in the dark. For tonight, we begin the entire story of Greek mythology, a story of chaos, love, betrayal, and fate. A story that will carry us from the emptiness before the world to the fading echoes of Olympus itself. And with that, let us begin. Before the first dawn, before even time had learned to count its steps, there was only chaos. Not the storm of battle, not noise or confusion, but a vast and yawning nothing. Chaos was an emptiness without shape, a chasm without edge, a breath before the first word was spoken. It was silence so complete that even silence itself had not yet been born. From this endless stillness, the first presences emerged, as though dreams were taking form out of sleep. The first was Gaia, the earth. Wide and solid, she stretched herself beneath the void, a steady foundation upon which all else would one day stand. She was fertile ground before there were seeds, a mother before there were children. Alongside her came Nyx, the night. She wrapped herself like a black cloak across the unseen edges of the cosmos. Nyx was not simply darkness, but the very idea of rest, of endings, of the quiet that follows the setting of the sun, though in those earliest days no sun had yet risen. From her, the hush of mystery flowed, and with them came Eros, desire, not the playful Cupid with wings we imagine today, but a deeper, older stirring, the force that draws one thing to another that makes creation possible. Without Eros, nothing would join, nothing would grow. He was the spark that would bind the earth and the sky, the seed of life hidden in the stillness. Others soon appeared. Erebus, the shadow of deep darkness, and Hemera, the brightening of day, stirred quietly into being, balancing one another as shadow balances light. Far below, Tartarus yawned open, a deep pit darker than night, destined to hold what the world could not bear above its surface. Gaia, ever fruitful, longed for a companion. From within herself she brought forth Uranus, the sky, vast and shining, to stretch across her body. He blanketed her with stars and gave her the comfort of a partner. Where earth pressed upward, sky pressed downward, and between them the world took shape, the first embrace, the first joining of form and formlessness. Together, Gaia and Uranus began to people the cosmos. From them came the first children, radiant and strong, the Titans, tall as mountains, each destined to carry the weight of heaven or the rhythm of the seas. Others were stranger, the Cyclopes with a single blazing eye, and the 100-handed ones, fierce and mighty, their strength unmatched. It was a beginning filled with promise, yet beneath the promise lay a hidden tension. For though Gaia was fertile and generous, Uranus, the sky, feared the power of his children. Already seeds of conflict were stirring, though in this first age of creation, all was still unfolding slowly, like dawn creeping over the horizon. Thus the story of the gods began, not with fire and thunder, but with emptiness, silence, and the first awakening. Out of the void came earth and sky, night and desire, shadow and light. A stage was built, and upon that stage, the drama of eternity would soon play out. And so, from chaos, the first order of the world was born, The world had only just begun to breathe, yet already it carried unease. Gaia, the earth, had given birth to many children with Uranus, the sky. The Titans were tall and strong, embodying the elements of the cosmos. Oceanus, the endless stream that circles the world. Hyperion, the brilliance of the sun. Themis, the keeper of law and order. And Rhea, gentle and nurturing. Each Titan carried within them the seeds of what the world would one day become. But not all of Gaia's children were so pleasing. Among them were the Cyclopes, one-eyed beings of immense power, their gaze like fire. There were also the 100-handed ones, with arms too many to count and strength so great that they could shake the foundations of mountains. To Gaia, they were her children, beloved though strange. To Uranus, they were abominations. Fearing their power, Uranus sought to contain them. One by one, he pushed the monstrous children down into Gaia's depths, burying them within her body. The Cyclopes and 100-handed ones were forced into darkness, trapped beneath the very earth that had borne them. Gaia, though vast and strong, felt the weight of their imprisonment within her. The pain of it pressed against her heart, and sorrow turned slowly into anger. She loved Uranus as her partner, but he had turned cruel, ruling over their children not with care, but with fear. The world itself groaned under his heavy sky, and Gaia began to whisper of change. She devised a secret plan. Reaching deep into herself, she shaped a weapon unlike any other, a great sickle of jagged stone, sharp enough to cut even the heavens. With this tool, she sought someone brave enough to act, to stand against Uranus and free her children. Yet when Gaia revealed her plan to her sons, the Titans, they hesitated. Uranus was vast, covering everything. To rise against him seemed impossible, but one among them stepped forward. Kronos, the youngest Titan, bold and ambitious, did not shrink back. Where his brothers trembled, Kronos smiled a sharp, determined smile. He took the sickle from Gaia's hands, its edges gleaming in the dim light of creation. "I will do it," he said. "I will bring an end to our father's reign, and when it is done, the world will be ours." Gaia looked upon her son with a heavy heart, knowing that once begun, such deeds could not be undone. Yet her sorrow was mixed with resolve. The cycle had begun, child rising against parent, power passing from one generation to the next, and so, beneath the endless dome of Uranus, with the weight of the imprisoned children pressing inside her, Gaia waited. The earth held her breath. The night of reckoning came quietly. Uranus, the sky, stretched endlessly above, heavy and unyielding. He believed himself eternal, a ruler beyond challenge. But below him, Gaia and her son Kronos prepared to end his reign. With the jagged sickle clutched in his hand, Kronos lay in wait. Gaia, vast and steady, guided her son, giving him the courage to strike. One by one, the other Titans withdrew, unwilling to risk their father's wrath. Only Kronos remained, fearless in his ambition. When Uranus descended to lie upon Gaia, as he had so many times before, the trap was sprung. Kronos leapt forward, sickle raised high, and with one fierce stroke, he struck down his father. The sound was not thunder, but a silence broken, a shattering of the old order. Uranus fell back in agony, and from his wounds spilled a tide of blood across the earth. Wherever the drops touched, new and terrible beings arose. From the ground sprang the Erinyes, the Furies, spirits of vengeance with eyes burning like coals. The giants too were born, fierce and towering, their fury echoing the violence of their birth. From the foam of the sea, stirred by the cast-off remains of Uranus, came Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and desire, a strange gift born of cruelty. The sky recoiled, retreating from the earth, and in that distance the heavens lifted high above the world. No longer would Uranus press down upon Gaia. The earth could breathe again, and the cosmos stretched wide and open. Kronos stood victorious, the sickle still dripping with the deed. He declared himself ruler, the new king of the cosmos, and his fellow Titans gathered around him. But though Kronos had broken his father's power, Uranus's voice still rang out in prophecy. "You too, my son," the sky warned, "will be brought low by your own child. Just as you have betrayed me, so too will one of your sons rise against you." It was a curse as much as a warning, a chain of fate binding father to son, generation to generation. Kronos, proud and unshaken, laughed at the words. He believed himself clever enough to avoid such a fate. But destiny had already begun its long weaving, and the pattern could not be undone. The age of Uranus was ended. The age of the Titans had begun. With Uranus cast aside, Kronos crowned himself king of the cosmos. Around him, the Titans rejoiced, for the weight of their father's sky had been lifted, and the world stretched vast and free. Kronos, bold and cunning, sat upon his new throne and looked upon creation as his inheritance. Yet in the shadows of his triumph lingered his father's words, the prophecy of betrayal. Uranus had warned, "Just as you overthrew me, so too will your own child rise against you." Kronos dismissed it with laughter in public, but in the private chambers of his mind, the words echoed endlessly. Fear, like a seed, rooted itself in his heart. Kronos took Rhea, his sister, as his queen. Together, they ruled the world and began to bring forth children of their own. These were no ordinary infants. Each was radiant, divine, destined for greatness. Hestia, goddess of the hearth; Demeter, bringer of the harvest; Hera, the proud queen-to-be. Later came Hades, lord of the underworld, and Poseidon, master of the seas. But with every birth, Kronos' fear grew sharper. He could not forget the prophecy. He could not trust the loyalty of his own blood. And so, when each child was born, he acted with cruelty beyond imagining. Kronos opened his vast mouth and swallowed the newborn whole, imprisoning them within his body as Uranus had once imprisoned the Cyclopes. Rhea, stricken with grief, wept for her children. She could hear their cries swallowed into silence, their divine sparks extinguished within her husband's endless hunger. Yet, she was powerless to stop him. Each time a child was taken, Kronos reassured her that it was necessary, that fate could not be risked. And so, one by one, the children vanished into the darkness of their father's belly. The cosmos grew quieter, lonelier, as its future was swallowed whole. The Titans still ruled, but Gaia felt the heaviness of sorrow once more. The world that had begun with promise now trembled under fear. Rhea's heart ached, but she kept her silence, waiting. She was not without cunning, and though Kronos' hunger seemed endless, she began to dream of a way to save at least one of her children. For in the cycle of prophecy and betrayal, she sensed that the story was not yet finished, and so Kronos ruled, the hungry king, triumphant but afraid, his throne built not on love but on the devouring of his own blood. Rhea had endured loss after loss. 5 children had been taken from her arms, each devoured by Kronos in his endless hunger. She wept in silence, mourning daughters who would never kindle the hearth, sons who would never claim their place in the world. Yet, still she endured, for within her heart she carried both grief and resolve. When her time came to bear a 6th child, Rhea knew she could not surrender again. This one must be saved. She turned not to her husband, but to Gaia, her mother, who had seen so many ages rise and fall. Gaia, wise and steady, listened to her daughter's cries and guided her with a plan as old as fate itself. When labor came, Rhea traveled in secret to the island of Crete, far from the watchful gaze of Kronos. There, in a hidden cave upon the slopes of Mount Dicte, she gave birth to a son, the child who would change everything. His name was Zeus. The cave was dark but warm, its stone walls echoing softly with the cries of the newborn god. Nymphs gathered to care for him, cradling the infant in woven blankets. A she-goat, Amalthea, offered her milk, nourishing the child with strength divine. Bees brought honeycomb to sweeten his lips, and doves circled quietly above, as if the whole of nature had conspired to protect him. But secrecy was vital. If Kronos heard the cries of the baby, he would come, and the prophecy would end before it began. So Gaia taught the Kuretes, a band of armored dancers, to clash their spears against their shields whenever the infant wailed. Their rhythm drowned the sound of Zeus's cries, echoing through the mountains as if it were only the clamor of celebration. Meanwhile, Rhea carried out the second part of Gaia's plan. She swaddled a stone in fine cloth, shaping it to resemble her newborn son. With trembling hands, she presented it to Kronos. True to his nature, the hungry king did not question. He opened his vast mouth and swallowed the stone whole, believing once more he had destroyed his fate. Yet fate had slipped past him. Hidden in Crete, the child grew in secret. Each day, Zeus became stronger, nourished by the earth, guarded by nymphs, watched over by Gaia herself. Though still small, his eyes carried the fire of destiny, and his laughter, when it rang out between the clashing of bronze, seemed to promise that the age of the Titans would not last forever. And so, unknown to Kronos, the seed of his downfall had already been planted. The hidden child waited, growing in silence, as the story of the cosmos turned toward a new chapter. Time passed in secret, and the child who had been hidden in a cave grew strong. Zeus, nourished by Amalthea's milk and guarded by the faithful nymphs, learned the ways of the world in silence. The Kuretes still danced their clashing dance, drowning his cries until he no longer needed hiding. By the time he was grown, Zeus's stride was steady, his voice carried command, and in his eyes burned the certainty of fate. He had not forgotten his brothers and sisters, swallowed whole by Kronos before they had even drawn a breath of the open air. Though he had never seen them, he felt their absence like a shadow beside him. Their cries, muffled in his father's belly, seemed to echo in his dreams. Zeus knew that if the world was to be freed, if the future was to be reclaimed, they must be restored. Guided by Gaia, Zeus sought the wisdom of Metis, the goddess of cunning thought. She knew what brute force could not achieve, cleverness might. Metis gave him a draft, a potion brewed from herbs deep-rooted in the earth, strong enough to stir the insides of even a god. With it, Zeus could undo what Kronos had swallowed. When the time was right, Zeus approached his father. Kronos, unsuspecting, accepted the drink. At first, he felt only unease, but soon the potion twisted within him like fire. A great heaving began, and one by one, the children he had swallowed were forced back into the light. First came Hestia, radiant and gentle, goddess of the hearth. Then Demeter, who would one day bless the earth with harvest. Hera followed, proud and sharp-eyed, already carrying the bearing of a queen. After her came Hades, grim and shadowed, and Poseidon, brimming with the strength of the sea. Each one, though swallowed as an infant, emerged fully grown, their divinity preserved by Kronos' strange prison. For the first time, the siblings stood together, side by side, a family reunited not by peace, but by rebellion. They looked to Zeus, who had freed them, and in that moment their loyalty was sealed. Kronos, weakened and enraged, realized too late what had been done. The prophecy he had sought to devour had taken form before his very eyes. No longer could he rule unchallenged. The children of Kronos had risen, and the world trembled on the edge of war. The family that had been broken was whole again, but reunion was only the beginning. Ahead lay a struggle greater than the cosmos had ever seen, a war not just between father and son, but between generations, between the old order and the new. The world stood at a crossroads. The children of Kronos had been freed, their strength newly awakened, their loyalty bound to one another. For the first time, Zeus, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon stood as one family, the Olympians, and across from them loomed the old order, the Titans, still mighty, still entrenched in power. Kronos, though shaken, would not surrender. He rallied his brothers and sisters, calling forth the great host of the Titans. Oceanus, the endless river, held back in neutrality, but many others came to Kronos' side. Atlas, broad-shouldered and unyielding, took his place among the front ranks. Hyperion, bright as the sun, and Iapetus, stern and relentless, joined the cause. The world itself seemed to shudder as the armies of the old and new assembled. For 10 long years, the war raged. Thunder shook the sky as mountains were hurled like stones. The earth cracked open under the weight of divine battle. Titans and Olympians clashed in fury, their power reshaping the very bones of creation. By day, the sky roared with fire. By night, the earth groaned with the pounding of war. At first, the struggle stood in balance. The Titans were vast and ancient, their power like the roots of the cosmos. The Olympians were younger, swifter, but untested. Victory swung like a pendulum, one day to Kronos, another to Zeus. But Gaia had not forgotten her pain, nor the children locked inside her depths. She whispered to Zeus of the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones, still imprisoned in Tartarus. If freed, they could turn the tide of war. With resolve, Zeus descended into the underworld, breaking the chains that bound them. The Cyclopes, grateful for their freedom, offered gifts of power. To Zeus, they gave the thunderbolt, sharp and blazing, a weapon that could split the sky. To Poseidon, they gave the trident, mighty enough to shake the seas. To Hades, they gave the helm of darkness, a crown that cloaked him in invisibility. Each gift carried the weight of destiny. The 100-handed ones, towering and terrible, hurled boulders as though they were pebbles, their 100 arms raining down destruction upon the Titans. The battlefield tilted, the balance broken. At last, the Olympians triumphed. Kronos and his allies were cast down. The 100-handed ones drove them into the abyss of Tartarus, where unyielding gates of bronze were shut upon them. Deep in that pit, guarded by their former prisoners, the Titans would remain. Zeus stood victorious, lightning still in his hand. The age of the Titans was ended. The age of the Olympians had begun. But though the war was over, a question lingered like a shadow across the bright new dawn. Would this new order prove any different from the old? The war had ended. The Titans were chained in the depths of Tartarus, their voices echoing faintly in the darkness. The dust of battle settled over the world, and for the first time in 10 long years, silence stretched across the mountains and seas. But peace did not come easily. Victory had given the Olympians power, yet power needed to be divided. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, the 3 brothers who had fought side by side, now faced the question of how to share the rule of all things. Each was mighty, each ambitious, and each carried within him the fire of destiny. The cosmos itself waited to see how they would choose. To avoid bloodshed among themselves, they turned to chance. The brothers agreed to cast lots, letting fate decide their realms. Zeus drew the sky, vast and high, with its rolling clouds and flashing storms. To him went the thunderbolt, and with it, the throne of Olympus. Poseidon's lot was the sea, deep and restless, where waves crashed and currents swirled in endless motion. To him went the trident, symbol of command over every ocean, river, and spring. Hades, the eldest yet most solemn, drew the underworld. His was a realm not of light, but of shadow, where the souls of the dead would gather. He took the helm of darkness, which cloaked him in invisibility, sealing his dominion as lord of what lay below. The earth itself, solid and fertile, they agreed to share in common, for all would need her bounty. Yet even in this pact, a quiet unease lingered. Zeus, in the high throne of Olympus, claimed authority over gods and men alike, declaring himself king above his brothers. Poseidon, proud and quick to anger, resented the sky's dominion over sea and storm, and Hades, though bound by duty, carried the bitterness of one who ruled unseen, far from sun and star. Still, the arrangement held. The heavens thundered with Zeus's might, the seas roared with Poseidon's power, and the underworld echoed with Hades' solemn voice. The cosmos was ordered, balanced on the uneasy peace of 3 brothers bound by blood, rivalry, and fate. And so, the new age began. With Olympus rising above all, a house of gods where triumph and jealousy, love and betrayal would soon weave their endless stories. With the war behind them and the realms divided, the Olympians built their shining court upon the peak of Mount Olympus. High above the clouds, their palace gleamed with marble halls and golden thrones. From there they could look down upon the earth and seas, ruling over gods and mortals alike. Zeus sat at the center, crowned with lightning, his voice carrying the weight of command. He declared himself king of gods and men, the order of Olympus resting upon his authority. Around him gathered his siblings, Hera at his side, regal and sharp-eyed. Poseidon below, restless like the seas he commanded, Demeter with her quiet gifts of harvest, Hestia tending the hearth, and Hades, though rarely present, bound to his solemn kingdom beneath the earth. But Olympus, for all its beauty, was no place of peace. The gods, though immortal, carried within them the same jealousies, desires, and tempers that stirred in mortal hearts. Rivalries blossomed as quickly as flowers in spring. Alliances shifted, loyalties were tested, and even within Zeus's own household, betrayal was never far. Hera, his queen, grew weary of his countless affairs with goddesses and mortal women alike. Her jealousy burned bright, not only against Zeus, but against the children born from his wanderings. Her wrath would stretch across the earth, falling upon innocent mortals caught in the storm of divine family drama. Poseidon, proud lord of the seas, often bristled under Zeus's rule. Though the lots had given him dominion over the waters, storms themselves still bent to Zeus's thunderbolt. Brotherly love was shadowed by resentment, and Poseidon's anger could rise as suddenly as the tide. Even the younger gods were drawn into the tensions. Athena, wise and calm, sought balance and order, while Ares, fierce with warlust, longed for strife. Apollo and Artemis, radiant twins, brought light and shadow, music and the hunt, their gifts dazzling yet stirring envy among others. The halls of Olympus rang with laughter, music and feasts, but beneath the banquets lay endless intrigue. Each god guarded pride and power, each sought to outshine the others. To mortals below, the gods seemed radiant and eternal. But within their lofty palace, Olympus was less a home of harmony than a court of endless drama, a mirror of the world they ruled. And so, the age of the Olympians truly began. Not with quiet order, but with quarrels and jealousies that would spill down from the mountain into every corner of the human world. While the gods quarreled in their golden halls, the story of humanity was written upon the earth below. Men, too, had their ages, each marked not by rising glory, but by a slow decline, from brilliance to burden, from harmony to hardship. The first was the Golden Age. In those earliest days, mortals lived as if they were close to the gods themselves. They knew no labor, no hunger, no pain. The earth gave freely of its fruits. Grain rose unbidden. Trees dropped their harvests without hand or plow. There was no war, no envy, no cruelty. Men lived long and peaceful lives, and when at last their days ended, they drifted gently into death like falling asleep. Their spirits remained upon the earth, guardians watching silently over those who came after. Then came the Silver Age. Mortals of this race were unlike their golden ancestors. They lived long years as children, never maturing, and when they reached adulthood, they were foolish, reckless, and arrogant. They showed little reverence to the gods, neglecting sacrifice and law. Their lives were short, their tempers sharp. In anger, Zeus struck them down, erasing their ungrateful generation from the earth. Next arose the Bronze Age, a race of men forged from ash trees, as hard and unyielding as the metal that bore their name. Their bodies were mighty, their spirits fierce. They lived only for war, clad in bronze armor, wielding bronze weapons, and filling the earth with the clash of battle. They had no care for art, no love of peace. In the end, They destroyed themselves, their own violence consuming their age until nothing remained but silence. Yet, after them came a brighter glimmer, the age of heroes. These were the men of legend, the ones whose names filled the songs, Perseus and Theseus, Heracles and Jason, and the warriors who fought at Troy. Unlike the bronze race, these mortals were noble and courageous, their deeds touched by the gods themselves. When their lives ended, some were carried to the Isles of the Blessed, a paradise at the edge of the world where soft breezes blew and fields were ever green. At last came the Iron Age, the age in which Hesiod, the poet, lived, and the age in which mankind still dwells. Here, men toil endlessly, straining under the burden of labor. They rise and fall in a world marked by envy, greed, and sorrow. Children dishonor parents, friends betray friends, oaths are broken, and strife is constant. Even the gods look upon the iron race with weary hearts. And yet, in this age, there is endurance. Though life is filled with hardship, it continues generation after generation, bearing its weight with the stubbornness of stone. Thus, humanity, like the gods, has its story written not in triumph alone, but in decline and struggle. From gold to silver, bronze to iron, men grow weaker, yet still they live on beneath the gaze of Olympus. Among mortals, born of kings yet touched by the gods, there came Perseus, a boy destined to carve his name into legend. His story began not with triumph, but with fear. His mother, Danae, had been hidden away by her father, King Acrisius, after a prophecy warned that her child would one day cause his death. Yet Zeus, in a golden shower of light, visited Danae in her prison, and from that union Perseus was born. When Acrisius discovered the child, he dared not shed his grandson's blood. The anger of Zeus was too great a risk. Instead, he placed Danae and the infant into a wooden chest and cast them upon the sea, leaving the waves to decide their fate. But the sea, though wild, carried them gently to the island of Seriphos, where a kind fisherman took them in. There, Perseus grew, strong and proud, his destiny hidden like a seed beneath the soil. Years later, the island's king, Polydectes, grew lustful for Danae and sought to rid himself of her son. He set Perseus a task he believed impossible, to bring back the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned all who met it into stone. It was not a challenge, but a death sentence. Yet the gods had other plans. Hermes, swift of wing, and Athena, wise in counsel, came to Perseus's aid. They armed him with gifts, a mirrored shield to look upon Medusa without meeting her eyes, winged sandals to carry him through the air, a sword sharp as starlight, and a cap of invisibility to hide him from sight. With these tools, the boy was remade into a hero. Across the sea he flew, through storms and winds, until at last he came to the Gorgon's lair, a place where stone figures lay scattered like a garden of statues, each once a living soul. Two of the sisters slept, monstrous and immortal, but Medusa, the mortal one, lay waiting. Her hair hissed with serpents, her breath thick with venom, her face deadly to behold. Carefully, Perseus crept forward, shield raised. He did not look at her directly, but at the reflection shimmering on its polished surface. And with one swift stroke, he brought the blade down, severing her head. From Medusa's body sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior with a golden blade, strange children born of her blood. Perseus placed the head into a pouch, its power still alive even in death, and fled before the immortal sisters could strike. He had done the impossible, slain the monster no mortal dared face. On his return journey, more trials awaited. He found Andromeda chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea serpent, and with Medusa's head, he turned the beast to stone, saving the maiden and winning her love. Perseus returned not as a boy, but as a hero, bearing both a bride and a weapon feared even by gods. His name was sung across Greece, the first of many heroes to step from the shadow of Olympus into the light of legend. Among the many children sired by Zeus, none was stronger, none more enduring than Heracles. His name meant the glory of Hera, though it was bitterly ironic, for Hera, queen of the gods, despised him above all others. Born of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene, Heracles carried within him the strength of a god but the vulnerability of a man. And for this, Hera marked him with her unending wrath. Even in his cradle, her hatred pursued him. She sent 2 serpents to coil about the infant as he lay sleeping, their tongues flickering, their bodies winding around his small arms. Yet the child, not yet weaned, grasped each serpent in his tiny fists and crushed them until their bodies grew still. The palace awoke to his cries, but the threat had already passed. The child of Zeus was no ordinary mortal. His strength was beyond measure. Heracles grew broad of shoulder, fierce in courage, but though his might seemed unshakable, fate wove tragedy into his path. Hera clouded his mind with madness, and in that madness he struck down his own wife, Megara, and their children. When his senses returned, grief crushed him heavier than any burden he had ever borne. Seeking purification, he turned to the oracle of Delphi. There, the priestess, speaking with the voice of Apollo, declared that only through service, through toil and trial, could he atone. He must place himself under King Eurystheus of Tyrants and perform whatever labors the king demanded. Thus began the 12 labors of Heracles, each task more impossible than the last. He faced the Nemean lion, its hide impenetrable to blade, and strangled it with his bare hands. He battled the Hydra, its many heads sprouting anew with every strike, until he burned the stumps with fire to halt their return. He captured the Ceryneian hind, swift and untouchable, pursued for a year before he brought it back alive. He hunted the Erymanthian boar, wrestled the man-eating birds of Stymphalos, and cleaned the Augean stables, not with brush or shovel, but by turning the course of rivers themselves. He seized the Cretan bull, captured the mares of Diomedes who feasted on human flesh, and stole the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. He drove away the cattle of the monster Geryon, plucked the golden apples of the Hesperides, and at last descended into the underworld itself, binding Cerberus, the 3-headed hound, with his bare arms. Each labor was not just a feat of strength, but a test of will. Again and again, Heracles faced what no mortal could endure, and again he emerged, scarred but unbroken. Yet though his labors brought him fame, they never freed him from sorrow. Hera's hatred followed him always, whispering curses into the cracks of his life. In the end, Heracles' mortal body could not withstand the weight of his destiny. Poison seeped into his veins, a cloak meant as a gift burning his flesh instead. Writhing in agony, he built his own funeral pyre and lay upon it. Flames rose, but from the smoke, Heracles was not destroyed. He was remade. His mortal half perished, but his divine spirit ascended. On Olympus, he was welcomed at last among the gods, reconciled even with Hera, who gave him her daughter Hebe as wife. Thus, Heracles, son of Zeus, lived a life marked by toil, tragedy, and triumph. Cursed at birth, driven by madness, yet raised to godhood, he remains the most enduring of heroes, the mortal who bore the weight of the impossible, and by doing so became immortal. In the city of Athens, long before its philosophers and temples, there lived a young prince named Theseus. He was strong, bold, and restless, a child of destiny, though still untested. His mother raised him far from court, but when he came of age, she revealed a hidden truth. Beneath a heavy stone, his father, King Aegeus, had left a sword and sandals. If the boy was strong enough to lift the stone and claim them, he would prove himself worthy of his lineage. Theseus lifted the stone with ease. Sword in hand, sandals upon his feet, he set out for Athens to claim his birthright. The journey itself became his first proving ground. Along the roads, he encountered brigands and monsters, each crueler than the last. Periphetes with his iron club, Sinis who bent trees to tear men apart, Siren who cast travelers into the sea to be devoured by a monstrous turtle. Each one Theseus met with courage, turning their own cruelty back upon them, leaving the road to Athens safe for all who followed. At last, he reached his father's city, but peace was not to be found. Athens groaned under a terrible tribute owed to Crete. Years before, King Minos of Crete had waged war upon the Athenians. When he triumphed, he demanded a cruel price. Every 9 years, 7 Athenian youths and 7 maidens must be sent across the sea to Knossos, where they would be cast into the labyrinth of the Minotaur, a creature half man, half bull, born of Minos's own household, hidden in a maze no one could escape. When the time for the tribute came again, Theseus did not hesitate. He stepped forward and offered himself as one of the chosen, vowing not to perish but to slay the monster and end the curse upon his people. His father wept, but Theseus's resolve could not be shaken. In Crete, fortune took the shape of a woman. Ariadne, daughter of Minos, looked upon the Athenian prince and saw both courage and kindness. She could not bear to see him lost in the labyrinth, so she gave him a gift, a ball of thread. "Tie it at the entrance," she told him, "and unwind it as you go. When the beast is slain, the thread will guide you home." That night, torchlight flickered against stone as Theseus entered the twisting maze. The walls pressed close, the passages bent back upon themselves, shadows shifted like living things. At the heart of the labyrinth, the Minotaur waited, its horns sharp, its breath steaming, its roar echoing like thunder. The struggle was fierce. The monster lunged, its strength greater than any mortal's, but Theseus fought with the desperation of one carrying the hope of a city. He grappled with the beast, seized its horns, and drove his sword into its throat. With a final bellow, the Minotaur fell. The curse was broken. Following Ariadne's thread, Theseus led the other youths back into the light. He had done what no Athenian dared dream. He had slain the monster and freed his people from their burden. Yet triumph carried with it sorrow. Theseus fled Crete with Ariadne at his side, but on the voyage home, he abandoned her upon the island of Naxos. The reasons are told in many ways. Some say he forgot her, some that a god commanded it, some that he feared her foreign ties. Whatever the cause, Ariadne was left behind, and Theseus sailed on. When he neared Athens, grief struck once more. He had promised his father to raise white sails if he returned alive, but in his haste, he forgot. From the cliffs, Aegeus saw only the black sails of mourning. Believing his son dead, the king cast himself into the sea, which bears his name to this day, the Aegean. Theseus returned a hero, but also a king marked by loss. His triumph over the monster gave Athens its freedom, yet his victories carried shadows, reminders that even the greatest of heroes cannot escape sorrow. Far to the east, in a land called Colchis, hung a treasure of legend, the Golden Fleece. It was the hide of a divine ram, once sent by the gods to rescue children from sacrifice, now nailed high upon an oak in a sacred grove. A dragon, sleepless and coiling, guarded it day and night. To possess the fleece was to hold a symbol of kingship and divine favor. Many had heard of it. Only one dared to claim it. That one was Jason, a prince of Iolcus. His uncle Peleus had usurped his throne, casting Jason's father aside. When Jason came of age, he returned to claim what was his. Peleus, unwilling to surrender, set him a task he believed impossible. "Bring me the golden fleece, and the throne is yours." Jason accepted, but no man could undertake such a journey alone. He called upon the heroes of Greece, and they answered: Heracles, Orpheus the musician, Castor and Polydeuces, Atalanta the swift huntress, and many more. Together they became the Argonauts, named for their ship, the Argo, built under Athena's guidance. Its prow bore a beam of living oak from Dodona, a sacred wood that could speak with the voice of prophecy. The voyage was long and perilous. The Argo sailed past treacherous shores where harpies plagued the blind seer Phineus, their cries filling the air until the winged sons of Boreas drove them away. The ship braved the clashing rocks, jagged cliffs that smashed together with the force of thunder. Only by releasing a dove ahead of them and following in the heartbeat of its flight did the Argonauts slip through alive. At last, they reached Colchis, where King Aeetes ruled. He agreed to give Jason the Fleece, but only if the prince proved his worth through impossible tasks. First, Jason must yoke 2 fire-breathing bulls, their hooves of bronze and their breath like furnaces. With them, he must plow a field. Then, into the furrows, he must sow dragon's teeth, from which armed warriors would spring fully grown. Only by overcoming these trials could he claim the prize. Despair nearly broke Jason, but fate had placed another on his path. Medea, daughter of Aeetes, sorceress of terrible power, looked upon the stranger and felt her heart move. Some say it was Eros himself, losing an arrow at her breast. Whatever the cause, Medea chose to help Jason, though it meant betraying her father. She gave him a potion to protect him from fire and whispered the secret of the dragon's teeth. When the warriors rose, he must cast a stone among them, so they would turn on each other. With her aid, Jason prevailed. He tamed the bulls, sowed the teeth, and watched the earthborn warriors destroy themselves in their fury. But Aeetes, deceitful, refused to yield the fleece. By night, Jason and Medea stole into the sacred grove. Together they lulled the dragon to sleep with spells and herbs, unhooked the shining fleece from its branch, and fled aboard the Argo. Their escape was stained with blood. Pursued by Aeetes' fleet, Medea bought time by sacrificing her own brother Apsyrtus, casting his body into the sea so her father would halt to gather the remains. It was an act that bound her forever to Jason's fate, for love had turned her heart and she had crossed the point of no return. The Argonauts sailed homeward, bearing the fleece and the promise of restored kingship. Yet Jason's greatest trial lay not upon the sea, nor in the lairs of monsters, but in the twists of human love and betrayal. For Medea, who had given him everything, would one day bring him ruin. It began not with armies, nor with kings, but with a wedding. The sea goddess Thetis was to be wed to the mortal hero Peleus, for Zeus himself had decreed it so. All the gods gathered on the shining slopes of Mount Pelion, feasting and celebrating the union. Music filled the air, golden cups overflowed, and laughter echoed across the halls of Olympus. But one goddess had not been invited. Eris, the spirit of strife, was left unwelcomed, for wherever she walked, quarrels followed. Angered by the insult, she arrived anyway, not with greetings, but with a gift, a golden apple. Upon its gleaming skin was inscribed 3 words, "To the fairest." She cast it into the hall, and silence fell. 3 goddesses stepped forward to claim it. Hera, queen of the gods, proud and commanding. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, calm but unyielding. And Aphrodite, goddess of love and desire, radiant and irresistible. Each declared herself the fairest. Each demanded the prize. Zeus, unwilling to choose among them, turned the matter over to a mortal. He sent the goddesses to the slopes of Mount Ida, where Paris, a prince of Troy, tended his flocks. Paris was handsome, thoughtful, yet fated to make a choice that would shape the destiny of nations. The goddesses did not simply ask for his judgment, they bribed him. Hera offered him power, promising kingship over all of Asia. Athena offered him wisdom and skill in war, the glory of an unbroken mind. But Aphrodite, with a smile, offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, swayed by desire, placed the apple in Aphrodite's hand. Hera's eyes narrowed with fury, Athena's with cold disdain. Their anger would not be forgotten. Aphrodite, triumphant, whispered her promise, the love of Helen, queen of Sparta, wife of Menelaus. And so, with a single choice, the threads of fate were woven tight. The quarrel of goddesses became the doom of cities. A golden apple, tossed in spite, would topple Troy itself. Helen was the daughter of Zeus and Leda, born not wholly mortal, but touched by divine beauty. From her youth, she was renowned as the most radiant woman in the world, a gift and a curse both. Kings from every corner of Greece sought her hand, for her beauty promised not only desire, but power. Her mortal father, King Tyndareus of Sparta, feared that choosing one suitor would bring war with all the others. Guided by clever Odysseus, he devised a solution. Each suitor must swear an oath to defend the chosen husband against any who would challenge his claim. In this way, jealousy would be bound by loyalty. Helen was given to Menelaus, brother of Agamemnon, king of Mycenae. Their marriage bound Sparta to one of the strongest houses in Greece. Yet even in the safety of her palace, Helen's fate was not her own. For Paris, Prince of Troy, had been promised her love by Aphrodite herself. When Paris journeyed to Sparta, Menelaus welcomed him as a guest, offering food, wine, and the sacred trust of hospitality. Aphrodite's spell stirred Helen's heart, and she looked upon the Trojan prince with desire. Some say she followed him willingly, bewitched by love. Others say she was stolen against her will. Whichever the truth, Helen left her husband's hall, sailing across the wine-dark sea to Troy. When Menelaus returned and found her gone, his grief became fury. He called upon the oath of Tyndareus, summoning the lords of Greece to honor their vow. From every land they came, Agamemnon with his armies, Odysseus with his cunning, Ajax with his towering strength, and Achilles, the greatest warrior of them all. Together they formed a host unlike any the world had seen, bound not by love of Helen, but by sworn duty and the hunger for glory. Across the sea, Troy rose proud and defiant. King Priam, aged and wise, ruled its high walls, while his sons stood ready to defend it, noble Hector, fierce Deiphobus, and Paris, whose choice had sparked it all. The city glittered with wealth, its gates strong, its people proud, but the shadow of war fell upon it like a gathering storm. Thus began the greatest conflict of myth, not born of kings, but of a single woman's beauty, a goddess's promise, and a mortal's desire. Helen, called the face that launched 1,000 ships, had become the spark of a war that would last 10 years and echo through eternity. The Greek host filled the shores of Troy, their black ships lined in endless rows. For years they battled beneath the high walls, yet neither side prevailed. The Trojans fought with courage, the Greeks with stubbornness, and the gods themselves descended often to tilt the balance. Hera and Athena aiding the Greeks, while Aphrodite and Apollo favored Troy. Among the Greeks, none shone brighter than Achilles, son of the sea goddess Thetis and the mortal Peleus. Swift of foot, unmatched in battle, he was the deadliest warrior alive. His very presence inspired fear in Troy's bravest soldiers. But Achilles carried not only strength, he carried pride, and pride would prove more dangerous than any spear. The quarrel began when Agamemnon, leader of the Greeks, seized a maiden given as a prize of war to Achilles. Insulted, humiliated before his peers, Achilles withdrew from the fighting. He sat apart, brooding by the ships, his wrath burning like a smoldering fire. Without him, the Greeks faltered. Their strength, their very spirit, seemed broken. The Trojans pressed their advantage. Hector, noble prince of Troy, led them to the very edge of the Greek camp. Fires licked at the ships. The war teetered on the brink of destruction. In desperation, Achilles' companion and dearest friend, Patroclus, begged him to return to battle. But Achilles, still seething, refused. Instead, he allowed Patroclus to wear his armor, to lead the Myrmidons as though Achilles himself had returned. Patroclus fought bravely, scattering the Trojans and driving them back. But fate had marked him. Apollo struck him down in the chaos, and Hector, seizing the moment, pierced him with a final blow. When the dust cleared, Patroclus lay lifeless, his spirit fled to the underworld. News of his death reached Achilles, and his grief erupted into fury unlike any the world had seen. His rage was not against Troy alone, but against fate itself. He swore vengeance upon Hector, and his mother Thetis brought him new armor forged by Hephaestus, its bronze gleaming with the fire of the forge. Achilles returned to battle, unstoppable. He cut through Trojan lines like a storm, scattering men before him. At last, he met Hector beneath the walls of Troy. The two clashed, spear against shield, strength against courage. But fate had already chosen the victor. Achilles struck Hector down, then in his wrath, bound the prince's body to his chariot and dragged it around the walls of Troy, a sight of horror that filled even the gods with pity. Yet grief is a heavy burden. In time, old King Priam came by night to the Greek camp, guided by Hermes. Kneeling before his enemy, he begged for the body of his son. Touched by the sight of the father's sorrow, Achilles relented. For a moment, wrath gave way to compassion, and the two men wept together, one for his son, the other for his friend. Still, the war was not ended. The rage of Achilles had burned bright, but destiny had not finished with him. His fate, whispered since his birth, waited just beyond the walls of Troy. For 10 long years, the Greeks and Trojans had struggled, and still the high walls of Troy stood unbroken. Heroes had fallen, families torn apart, and the gods themselves had quarreled openly upon the battlefield. Yet no spear nor sword could topple the city. Troy's gates remained sealed, and hope still burned in its towers. But war is not always won with strength. Sometimes it bends to cunning. And among the Greeks there was none more cunning than Odysseus, king of Ithaca. He conceived a plan so daring, so strange, that it seemed like madness, yet it would be the end of Troy. The Greeks pretended to abandon the war. They burned their tents, launched their ships, and sailed away, leaving only a great wooden horse upon the shore. It was massive, towering above men, its flanks carved from oak, hollow within. To the Trojans, it appeared a gift, an offering to Athena, left as a token of Greek surrender. The Trojans gathered at the gates, marveling at the horse. Some urged caution. Laocoon, the priest, cried out, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts!" and hurled his spear into the wooden side. For a moment the horse shuddered, and a hollow sound rang out, but fate had already chosen. The Trojans ignored the warning. When sea serpents rose from the waves and crushed Laocoon and his sons in their coils, the people took it as a sign from the gods. The horse, they believed, must be sacred. So they dragged it within the walls. That night, Troy feasted. Fires burned high, wine flowed, and laughter filled the streets. The Greeks had gone, the war was over, or so they thought. But when midnight fell and the city slept, a hidden door opened in the horse's belly. From within crept Odysseus, Menelaus, and the chosen warriors concealed inside. They slipped into the streets, lit signal fires upon the towers, and opened the gates. From the sea, the Greek fleet returned, silent oars slicing through the dark. Troy awoke to fire and slaughter. Houses burned, temples crumbled, and the cries of battle filled the air. Priam, the old king, was struck down upon his own altar. Hector's little son was hurled from the walls. The women of Troy were seized as captives, dragged screaming toward the ships. At last, Helen, the woman whose beauty had sparked it all, stood once more before her husband Menelaus. Legends say his anger faltered at the sight of her, and he led her back to Sparta, her fate bound again to the man she had betrayed. By dawn, Troy was no more. Its towers smoldered, its people scattered, its glory turned to ash. The city that had defied the Greeks for a decade had fallen in a single night, undone not by strength, but by a trick. Yet victory brought no peace. The Greeks sailed home heavy with curses, each king carrying the weight of blood upon his ship. For the gods had watched the destruction, and they were not silent. Storms brewed, Vengeance stirred, and for many, the journey home would prove more perilous than the war itself. The towers of Troy had fallen, but for the Greeks, victory was only the beginning. Their ships, heavy with plunder and grief, turned toward home. Yet the gods had watched the sack of Troy, the temples defiled, the innocents slain, and their anger brewed upon the seas. For some, the voyage ended swiftly in ruin. For others, it stretched into long years of wandering. No journey was longer than that of Odysseus, king of Ithaca. Clever, restless, and resilient, he had been the mind behind the wooden horse. But his cunning, though admired by men, did not endear him to the gods. Poseidon, lord of the sea, nursed a deep grudge, and so the waters themselves rose against him. Odysseus's fleet was scattered. Storms hurled them upon strange shores, where wonders and terrors awaited. On one island, they found the lotus eaters, whose sweet fruit lulled sailors into forgetting home, leaving them content to drift forever. Odysseus dragged his men away, forcing them back to their oars. Another shore brought them face to face with Polyphemus the Cyclops, a giant with one blazing eye. Trapped in his cave, the men watched in horror as he devoured their companions raw. Only through trickery did Odysseus save the rest, blinding the monster and slipping away beneath the bellies of sheep. Yet, his pride betrayed him. As he fled, he shouted his true name, and Polyphemus, roaring in pain, called down his father Poseidon's curse. From that moment, the sea itself turned against Odysseus. His wanderings led him to Aeolus, keeper of the winds, who gifted him a bag of breezes to speed his return. But when Ithaca's shores lay in sight, his curious men opened it, loosing storms that flung them back into the wide sea. They drifted to Circe's island, where the enchantress turned men into swine. With Hermes' aid, Odysseus resisted her spells, and she, charmed by his will, became his lover, delaying him for a year. At last, Odysseus set sail again, but the path grew darker still. He descended into the underworld, seeking the shade of the prophet Tiresias. Among the dead, he found his mother, who had died of grief in his absence. He saw also the shades of heroes, Achilles, who confessed that glory in life was no comfort in death. Tiresias foretold that only through hardship and restraint would Odysseus see his home again. He sailed onward past the sirens, whose song lured sailors to their doom. Odysseus had his men stop their ears with wax, but bound himself to the mast, so he alone could hear their deadly voices and live. He passed between Scylla and Charybdis, a monster with 6 heads and a whirlpool that swallowed ships. To escape one was to fall to the other, and so he lost men but clung to survival. At last, he reached the island of Helios, where his men, starving, slaughtered the god's sacred cattle. In vengeance, Zeus struck their ship with a storm. All were lost but Odysseus, who clung to a spar and drifted alone for days. He washed ashore on the island of Calypso, a nymph who held him in her arms for 7 long years. She offered him immortality if he would stay, but though tempted, his heart longed always for Ithaca, for his wife Penelope, and for his son Telemachus, now grown without him. At last, the gods took pity. Hermes commanded Calypso to release him, and Odysseus, worn but unbroken, built a raft and set once more upon the sea. Storms still pursued him, but Athena's hand guided him toward safety. So, after 10 years of war and 10 years of wandering, Odysseus drew closer to Ithaca. Yet, homecoming too would demand its trials. Odysseus at last returned to Ithaca, disguised as a beggar, his heart both weary and unyielding. In his halls, he found arrogance and waste, suitors feasting on his stores, pressing his wife Penelope to choose a new husband. Patient Penelope, clever as her husband, had delayed them with her weaving and her wits, but the time had grown short. At last, Odysseus revealed himself. With his son Telemachus at his side, he bent his great bow, a weapon no other man could string, and loosed arrows that struck true. The suitors fell one by one, the hall filled with the echo of vengeance. When it was over, Odysseus stood again as king, reunited with Penelope. The circle of his long wandering closed. But even as Odysseus reclaimed his home, the age of heroes drew toward its twilight. The gods who once strode boldly through the world grew quieter. Their battles, their jealousies, their loves and betrayals, all had shaped the fate of men. Yet fate itself was stronger than even Zeus. The Moirai, the three fates, spun and cut the threads of life, and not even the thunderbolt could undo their weaving. In time, the gods retreated from the earth. No longer did mortals see them walking in fields or speaking from the heights of Olympus. Their voices grew faint, carried only in stories. Temples still rose, sacrifices still burned, but the divine presence dimmed. Wars of men replaced the wars of gods. The world turned slowly from myth to history. The Greeks would remember. They would tell of the golden days when Zeus ruled the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld. They would tell of Hera's jealousy, Athena's wisdom, Apollo's songs, Artemis's hunt, and Aphrodite's beauty. They would tell of heroes who lived briefly but brightly. Perseus, Heracles, Theseus, Jason, Achilles, Odysseus. Their stories would echo, not because the gods endured, but because human memory made them eternal. And so, the great cycle closed. From the yawning void of chaos to the fading echoes of Olympus, the myths of Greece flowed like a river, sometimes calm, sometimes violent, but always moving forward. The gods did not vanish. They became stories. And in the telling of those stories, they live still, not on Olympus, but in the quiet corners of the human mind, in the lullabies of history, in the whispers before sleep. And that is the entire story of Greek mythology. From the emptiness of chaos to the rise and fall of gods, to the fading of Olympus into memory. A tale of creation, of love and betrayal, of heroes and wars, told slowly enough to carry you into dreams. If you enjoyed drifting through this history, I invite you to stay with me for more quiet journeys. You can subscribe so you never miss the next story, leave a gentle like if it helped you rest, or share it with someone who might need a calm night too. But for now, close your eyes, let the weight of the day fall away, and rest. The gods have faded into silence, and so may you. Sleep well.